Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we are talking about Anna Kendrick's directorial debut, Woman of the Hour. This is a movie you can currently watch on Netflix for free. I mean, included in your subscription, right? This is one of the better movies I've seen this year. It's not going to be in my top 10. Maybe not even my top 20, but it's pretty good. Like, it's actually quite good. So if you have Netflix and you're looking for something to watch, genuinely check it out. Spoiler free, this is basically a true crime serial killer movie. And I know you're probably sitting there going, oh my God, we've had enough of these. And like, I kind of get what you're saying, but this one is very much interested in focusing on the victims. Again, it's directed by Anna Kendrick. She has a great performance and it centers around this centerpiece of a serial killer going on a blind dating game show, and you're meant to be sitting there like a Hitchcock movie going, oh my God, do not pick the serial killer to go on a date. And it's really well done. And I really want to talk about it. So this is going to be a post-game discussion for the rest of the video. If that sounds like it interests you, go check it out and come back to this video because now we are going to get into spoilers. So first off, this movie is very much interested in tackling the casual kind of misogyny that exists in society that allows these serial killers to operate in the way that they do. Very much in the same way that Dharma was interested in looking at police blind spots and kind of built-in systemic racism and inequality and also homophobia and the way that contributes to a serial killer like Jeffrey Dahmer getting away with what he wants to do. This movie very much does the same for the serial killer focused on in Woman of the Hour. He is someone who constantly gets away with multiple murders of women because the systems in place don't seem to investigate the murders properly. They don't seem that kind of interested in saving these women. And on top of that, women trust him and go on dates with him and like let them into his houses because other men in their lives fail them at multiple different points. And I think this film does a really good job of feeling like a series of vignettes exploring that topic. I've seen some criticism of this film that it feels rather unfocused. And I think that's a shame. Because to me, maybe if this movie was 2 hours, I would get the concern, this idea that like, oh my God, I watched a 2 to 3 hour movie and it was all over the place. But this movie feels like a really tight 90-minute movie that's just trying to show you a bunch of different incidents. So you get an overall picture of who this serial killer is. Now, the serial killer in question is Rodney Alcala, and there are kind of three big centerpieces of this movie. There is the victim Amy, there is the victim Cheryl, played by Anna Kendrick, and there is the victim called Charlie. And all three of them highlight the same sort of systemic issues in different ways. It is a vision of three women who are kind of completely ignored by people around them, kind of disregarded by society in different stages, in different ways. And that allows for this serial killer to take advantage of these blind spots and infiltrate their lives and obviously be a threat to them. Now, the centerpiece of this movie is Anna Kendrick. And you know what? I've heard some criticism about Anna Kendrick taking this story and making it about herself. But unfortunately, I do think this is probably going to be the thing that is the most interesting about this story. The idea that a mass serial killer of women was able to get on a blind dating talk show. Like, that's insane. And this whole sequence is built up in such a beautifully kind of well done way. The set design is incredible. The performances are incredible. And this section where Anna Kendrick's character gets on stage and starts asking kind of like real questions, right? Rather than the scripted kind of misogynistic questions they want her to ask, she starts asking questions that show off her intellect and spunk and really starts interrogating the three men on the other side. And I think what this opens up here is this really interesting extension of kind of that man versus bear conversation. And I want to get into that a bit, right? Because there are three guys on the other end during this blind dating section. And I want to talk about two of them. One is the serial killer named Rodney Alcala. This is the guy we've been watching murdering multiple people throughout the movie. But the other guy is this kind of seedy, fuckboy, chauvinistic idiot, right? And he says some really disparaging, gross comments about women off air regarding their cup size, right? And the serial killer calls him out for this when they're back on air. He exposes him for being chauvinistic on TV, calls out this guy and exposes him for his misogynistic remarks off air on air, right? Then when they cut to ad break again, these two men actually have a confrontation, and the chauvinist guy says to the serial killer, like, oh, let me get your number. Like, we should argue this out in our spare time. And the serial killer proceeds to hand him a Polaroid of one of his victims, like tied up and bloody, and it really confronts this other guy. And then this scene kind of ends with the chauvinistic guy that made the gross comment giving Anna Kendrick a warning. He whispers in her ear and says, be careful with that fucking freak. And I found this scene really interesting. I'm not saying this guy is like redeemed or the movie is interested in being like, actually, chauvinists have a heart of gold. But I like how this scene is showing two examples of threatening men, but they're threatening in different ways. One is directly confrontational, directly gross. He is easy to identify, right? The guy that's making chauvinistic remarks is going to give most people the ick, and rightfully most women are going to steer clear from him. But personally, I would much rather be dealing with someone like him than someone like Rodney Alcala, who seems to understand how to manipulate the kind of nice guy stuff. It reminds me a lot of discourse we have today, especially with these Love is Blind guys, right? But he seems to be someone who like can see the faults of other men and uses that to his advantage, comes off as like a nice guy, comes off as really emotionally mature and sensitive, and he uses that to his advantage. And I think the beauty of this dating game section is the fact that the serial killer actually has the upper hand because it is a blind dating show. I mean, I don't want to be mean, but if you look at all three men in this dating game section, he is clearly the most disheveled and the worst put together, right? He is the least physically appealing. He comes off a bit disheveled. He comes off a bit neurotic. However, given the fact that it's blind dating, he is able to weasel his way into Anna Kendrick's kind of good graces because he knows how to manipulate this sort of language. He knows how to target other men because his whole life, right, is probably blending into society and like fading into the background despite being a serial killer of allegedly up to 130 women. So I just find the scene really interesting. I think it's really well done. Now, it's important to note when I was looking into these murders, because I didn't know anything about it going into the movie, it is important to note that the real life guy is absurdly good looking. Like, not even Ted Bundy level good look, like insanely good looking, at least in my eyes. Like, that looks like a very good looking guy. And I think the fact that he was so good looking in real life makes it a bit more believable that he was able to kind of lure these women in and kind of come off as not threatening. And I think the movie makes an interesting choice by casting someone who comes off a lot less clean cut and a lot less interested in his physical appearance. But I think the way this movie explores these kind of gender-based issues really, really well done. I have to give a lot of credit to Anna Kendrick for her direction. There's also this subplot early on in the movie that doesn't necessarily link back to the serial killer plot itself, but I think again adds to this overall image the movie is trying to portray about these sort of systemic misogynistic things that make Rodney Alcala able to kind of manipulate women around him. It's this subplot with Anna Kendrick and her neighbor. The neighbor keeps being like, oh, let me like read lines with you. He like invades her apartment, doesn't read social cues that are very clear when Anna Kendrick's like, hey, I'm on the phone, do you mind leaving? He like bursts into her apartment, doesn't leave when she tells him to go, kind of insists that they go on a date to talk about, the bad audition she had, and then basically plows her with drinks. Then when she says, oh, it's time to go, he goes, oh, really? You're not having a good time? So she drinks more, hard cut, she slept with him. And you know what? It's not exactly assault, but it does leave you with a really icky feeling. You've watched this guy slowly just wear her down, and you've watched Anna Kendrick make all these non-verbal cues that she's not interested, she doesn't want to do this, and she's trying not to hurt his feelings because she doesn't know if he's going to lash out and murder her the way Rodney Alcala would, and then she wakes up in his bed. It's unfortunate, and I love the ending section as well. After she has managed to survive her encounter with Rodney Alcala, she then moves out because she's so frazzled, and then this neighbor doesn't even have the decency to say hi. This neighbor that was pretending to be so interested in her acting career, so interested in what she had to say, so interested in sleeping with her, right? Then sees that she's leaving and clearly scared and fragile, and he doesn't even have the heart to say hi or ask why she's leaving. Like, clearly he was never interested in her career going anywhere, and he was just trying to sleep with her. And this is confirmed in this scene. I also think it's interesting because maybe you could have the read that he's a bit offended that she's leaving without saying goodbye and he didn't know. But no, he came off really shitty to me and really like, okay, I got what I wanted. See you later. Really assholey guy. And again, this movie has this incredibly good section, right? Where after Anna Kendrick inevitably chooses Rodney Alcala, the serial killer, to go on the date with, you have this incredibly tense scene in the bar. Basically, what I felt like the scene was communicating is that thing we've seen where women are most scared of being murdered or assaulted, right? And men fear humiliation the most. And this is kind of shown, right, in this scene where he tries to be all like, emotionally connective with Anna Kendrick, you know, Mr. Sensitive. I'm not like all these other guys. I see you for your beautiful soul. You know, I can feel your unspoken energy. And she kind of gets the ick. She kind of tries not to laugh, and you feel the mood just fall out of the floor. It's tense. He seems pissed, genuinely dangerous, and you can tell she's terrified. And then this leads to this great scene where she's like kind of subliminally communicating with the maid, being like, please don't get us more drinks. Please let me go. And then she's trying to leave and he's following her. It's really tense. It's really, really well done. And I think this movie genuinely manages to capture a great sense of tension. I also love this brief little side plot we have with a character who is in the audience and recognizes Rodney Alcala, who may have murdered her friend, right? Well, she knows that he murdered her friend, but she was never able to prove it with the police, and she gets thrown. This is like a really minor side character. I reckon they get like 10 minutes of screen time, but again, just a really successfully well done vignette. This movie has about 3 or 4 of these, just these brief little stories, brief little insights into a relationship between Rodney Alcala and a potential victim or someone that knows a victim. And this one peaks with this scene where she goes to the car and her boyfriend is like, what's going on? And she explains to the boyfriend, like, that's the guy that killed my friend. Like, I know it. And it's really interesting because, you know what? If she was like, I'm going to get on stage and stab him, or I'm going to get on stage and like yell into the TV camera and say, arrest this man, I get why the boyfriend would be like, oh, you're definitely sure it's him. But instead, she just purely opens up to her boyfriend about how she's scared and she doesn't know what to do. And he instantly just goes like, oh, well, you know, you don't know if it's him. And at first I was like, okay, these are valid concerns. But then he keeps going to the point where it just feels really invalidating. Really like, why are you bothering me with this shit? And then he ends it by going, yeah, I just don't really know what you want me to do. And I'm like, dude, just be there for it. Like, what are you doing? He came off so fucking bad. And he started okay. Initially, I was like, okay, he's just showing some general concerns. It makes sense. He's trying to like keep things measured. And then he just comes off as a fucking asshole. Then this woman goes over to the TV producers and says, oh my God, you've got like this killer on your show. You need to get him off air. And this fucking asshole says, oh yeah, I'll get the producer, just go wait out there. And it ends up being the janitor. It's kind of a cruel prank. And one of my favorite moments in the movie is the janitor seems genuinely empathetic and sad in this situation. He's the only guy in this movie that, in my opinion, comes off kind of well. It's a really, really good moment. He seems genuinely upset for her and offers to help, but she's so hurt that she can't do it. She has to run off, and like rightfully so. I also love this section where we follow the character of Amy. This is the teenage victim that eventually helps him get caught, and this section is brilliant. We have this great section at the start of the movie where he strangles a woman and then, you know, resuscitates her only to do it again. And then we see this scenario play out again with Amy at the end of the movie. So she wakes up battered and bruised, looks over, and Rodney Alcala, the guy that has just beat her up, is crying and regretting what he's done. And I think what happens here is Amy clues into like, oh, if I make it look like I'm going to go to the police or I villainize him for this, he's going to kill me. So I need to act like I understand the regret he's having and like completely forgive him. So she starts going like, oh, you know, we can be okay after this. Like, we'll be okay. Like, I forgive you. Things just got out of hand, and he likes this. He appreciates this, and he lets her live for a bit longer. And they start driving around. There's this incredible moment where they get to an intersection and someone sees them in the car, and she has a really bruised face. And it's this interesting moment on both angles, right? Because for Rodney, this is a bit of a shit test. It's a bit like, let me see if you're going to try to escape or not. And if you try and escape, I'm going to kill you. She doesn't. And it seems like he has this moment of like, good girl, I trust you now. Really interesting. But on top of that, I think it's another moment that's speaking to the kind of complicity of men as a whole, right? I think this guy has a good chance to see a clearly domestically violent situation at the very least, if not a hostage or a murder situation going on, and he looks the other way. You know, to me, the scene worked double time because I also felt like it was highlighting the disappointment that these victims would feel when someone could have saved them and instead they have to save themselves. But regardless, they then get back to a little pit stop and she's able to run off and escape. And I think this is because of the trust she built up throughout these previous interactions with Rodney building up to this moment. And then we get these title cards that tell us the full scope of Rodney's murders, the tragedy of the fact that at one point he was arrested and then let go and was able to murder more women. And the idea that he's linked to potentially 130 people being murdered. But I do really think what they do with Rodney is really fascinating. They highlight that he has serious issues with women and humiliation. He gets really uncomfortable, really weird at multiple different points. I think it does a really good job of maybe how this casual misogyny that is shown throughout the movie in Hollywood and just general society, if turned up to 11, can turn really violent and really disgusting. But on top of that, there are these little great moments where he says like his favorite director is Roman Polanski, who, if you know about Roman Polanski's controversy, you know why that's a telling line. He consistently talks down to women like he's above them intellectually. He thinks they're below him. He thinks they're stupid. And that's why, again, the dating game section is so fascinating, because he's trying to come off really kind of progressive and emotionally mature, but then given a chance, eventually he will start resenting these women for being below him or humiliating him and eventually kill them, and sees this as somewhat justification. Also, what did you guys make of that scene with the young guy and the photos at the workplace when he wanted to like bring this guy over to take photos? I might have misread the scene. I thought that maybe this guy actually alerted the police that he was exhibiting weird behavior, and Rodney knew that and was really disappointed and hurt. But maybe that wasn't it. Maybe it was just because the police came to investigate him, he was sad that they couldn't hang out. I might need to rewatch the movie again. I can't tell if I misunderstood that scene. Let me know in the comments what you made of that scene, because again, I got the feeling like, oh, did that guy dob Rodney in and Rodney knows that, and it's this like intellectual face-off in the bathroom. But yeah, I really, really liked this movie. I also thought the murder of Charlie was really tragic, just a really sad section, right? Like she spills paint on herself and then she misses the delivery, and then these asshole men can't, wait 5 minutes. So she resorts to asking the guy across the street, and that guy just happens to murder her. It's really, really sad. Like, it's just a sad section. And I think Anna Kendrick's choice to focus on the victims, yes, she does focus on the victim or the potential victim that she plays for a substantial chunk, but I think that is a core interesting part to the story. I think at the end of the day, she is making art. She's allowed to want to make something entertaining and interesting. But I think the choice to focus on the victims here is a refreshing take. I'm not as mad as other people about these shows that focus on the killers, because I think at the end of the day, that is what people are going to find interesting. But I think this movie is a really good example and does a really good job of showing something where you can focus on the victims and give them empathy and understanding and kind of worship their memory and respect their memory, and make it still entertaining and interesting for true crime fans and just general fans alike. I think it's refreshing to be able to watch a true crime movie, a movie about a serial killer that has something to say past just like, oh, let's watch awful shit for 2 hours, is a tight 90 minutes, and also isn't too dark and confronting. Like, it is very dark in its subject matter. It is very confronting in its subject matter. But in terms of its presentation, it doesn't feel very kind of like reveling in the violence, reveling in the trauma and the shock of it. It's trying to be a cautionary tale and an examination of how these people are made and how they operate and how they manipulate women. Really well done. Just a pretty good movie that I strongly recommend you check out. Even if you've watched this whole video, I genuinely think you can watch this movie and get a lot out of it and enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.